Hi once again, everyone. I'm Ed Berliner, the man in the arena. For those of us on one side of the world, it is so far away, we cannot simply imagine what is happening in another part of the world. We have read about it in history books before, about tyranny, about despots, about dictators, and about wars, but we never experience it up close. That changed during Operation Desert Storm many years ago when that became the first network war. But now it is a social media war as well, as Russia invades Ukraine, as Belarus becomes involved, as Europe becomes destabilized. We are seeing and hearing more than we ever did before. It is being brought into our living rooms, into our homes. What is happening in Ukraine? And what is happening now is not just what we would consider war, but then again, there is the casualties, the civilian casualties, and the true horror of what is happening right now, as you see this, in Ukraine.
The graphic casualties of war. Images too disturbing to show as medics race to save the life of a little girl caught in the middle of this battle. Those attempts futile, as the weight of this conflict following Russia's invasion of Ukraine takes its toll on those desperately trying to save lives.
Yes! Yes!
Ukrainian forces have been relentless in their defense. This video shows their soldiers striking down a Russian helicopter, but Russia continues to wage attacks. Shelling Ukraine's residential communities, the second straight day of missile strikes, this one near an apartment complex. Attacks Ukraine's president has called frank, undisguised terror and a war crime. NATO's Secretary General saying today NATO will do whatever it takes to protect and defend its allies, but that right now there's no need to change the alert levels of NATO's nuclear forces. He warned Russia to immediately stop the invasion and to withdraw its forces.
We provide support to Ukraine, but at the same time it is a responsibility for NATO to ensure that we don't see a development where a conflict in Ukraine spirals out of control and becomes a full-fledged confrontation between NATO and Russia in Europe.
A huge explosion from an airstrike rocked the city of Kharkiv, known as Freedom Square. Dozens were injured and at least 7 people were killed. The Russian attack came 2 hours after the city's curfew was lifted, so this area was packed with people. Russia's presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, refuting claims its forces are conducting strikes against civilian infrastructure or residential areas, saying, quote, "We are talking only about the demilitarization of Ukraine and about military structures." Ukrainians have been making Molotov cocktails to retaliate. This video shows someone in a passing car tossing one at a Russian tank. A group of protesters were also captured using their bodies to block the advancement of the Russian military in their city.
It is fair to say that many of us cannot imagine what is happening in Ukraine at this moment. And we find ourselves wondering if we could do the same, and if we could have the same resolve as the people of Ukraine. But then again, there's also so many commentators out there and so many voices and so many things being written by people who absolutely have no idea what really goes on in the European theater, in that part of the world, and has studied it. One of the great things about my career is I have been fortunate to meet people who understand it, who are able to explain it, who are intelligent enough to not go through the usual hyperbole, but actually know what is happening and how it will affect the rest of the world. My guest is an author and a good friend, also a professor. Several of the books that he has written strike a note that many people should actually take time to read and understand. Syria, the United States, and the war on terror in the Middle East. There's also the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon, the double tragedy of refugees and impacted host communities. And the book that brought us together, where I first had a chance to interview him, Salafism in Lebanon, which teaches us more about exactly what happens in that part of the country in a very in-depth discussion, which is what we're going to have here. It is a pleasure to welcome my friend and someone that has taught me so much about foreign policy over the years, and he continues to this day, Professor Robert Rabeel from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. Professor, it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Ed, for having me, and thank you for this beautiful
really introduction. You humbled me, my friend.
You've earned every
And you
moment of
don't
it.
need people like me. Listen, and you don't need people like me to tell you about foreign affairs. I think you are well grounded in foreign affairs.
You know, I like to tell people sometimes, Professor, that when I'm speaking to them, I'm not a doctor. I just play one on TV. And I like to tell them that I'm not a foreign policy specialist. I play one on TV. I'm one of the people who likes to research, read, and understand the facts of where I'm going. But we are awash these days in a society and a culture that doesn't understand and that doesn't take the time to better understand what is happening. That's why I come to people like you. I know enough to go to the experts. So
Thank you. Thank
let
you.
me begin with this. That is the first thing that strikes me right now. Is it simply stated that because of the inaction of NATO, the European Union, the United Nations, and other countries as well, that this was inevitable, the re-rise of Putin, the attempt to reconnect and restructure the USSR, and that need again for power? It was going to happen because so many people just took an apathetic view of the world and said, don't worry, it'll all work itself out.
Okay. I broadly agree with the concept, about Putin and about, I wouldn't say restoring the glory and the area that the Soviet Union used to control. I would say to go ahead and have his sphere of influence, or what he considered as his sphere of influence. That was mainly his objective, Putin. Now, regarding NATO and what they are doing here, yes, indeed, this is where, I agree with you. And I think that somehow we misread Putin. We misread not only Putin, we misread the mindset of Russia. We misread the mindset of the political leaders of Russia. Yes, you have Putin, as we call him, dictator, the rulers, you call him whatever you want to call him. But if you look at how Putin came to power, he came to power in a very fast track, which means to me that he has supporters in the government, especially former KGB, now they are FSB. Now, where did NATO go wrong? Here we have to look at Putin's perspective and Russia's perspective. Let me just take you a little bit, a short journey in history. Now, according to German officials, American officials, and Russian officials, they will say, listen, we had a deal, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, that NATO will not expand eastward. Now, we American, we said, no, we did not do that deal. We did not do this agreement. Certain German official and Russian official say, yes, you promised the Russians you are not going to go eastward. Now, let's move forward. Moving forward, the Soviet Union collapsed. You have Yeltsin in power. And here the Clinton administration, we have to emphasize, from 1990, 1991 to 1996, it pursued what is called First Russia policy. Let me repeat that again. First Russia policy. We felt that, or the Clinton administration felt that it behooves United States, it serves United States and the security of Europe to bring Russia into the fold. Communism collapsed. There was no threat. Warsaw collapsed. Warsaw Pact collapsed. Now, what happened during that time from 1990 to 1996, you have tension. The first tension that came out, mainly vis-a-vis Chechnya, the first Chechen war, and Bosnia. You had the war again in Bosnia. Clinton was not happy with the Russian, what they were doing in Chechnya, and Yeltsin was not happy what's happening, in Bosnia. Still, they moved forward, but by 1996, what I call myself, I think that you have a certain orthodoxy in the bureaucracy of United States. And what do I mean by that? Mainly, you have a school of thought which hasn't changed despite the collapse of the Soviet Union, despite the collapse of the idea of communism. This orthodoxy or this school of thought remained. And it started mainly to take shape, and they felt that, and this is where Clinton again, and the administration went along with it. It now felt that it behooves United States to expand NATO to serve the security of United States. So we changed gear. We changed gear from first going ahead and saying, okay, we are going to bring Russia to the fold. This would serve our security. To what? To expanding NATO so that we could protect our security. The expansion of NATO, you have some scholars, and I'm not going to name anybody here. They say, oh, it's nothing there. Why Russia is going to be worried? No, it's a military alliance. Really, you have the EU and you have NATO, and at one time you had Warsaw Pact. Warsaw collapsed and NATO expanded. Now, what did you have next? Not only the expansion through Eastern Europe. What happened to Putin? Because in 2000 he became the president. 1999, 2000 he became president. The expansion to the Baltic states. The Baltic states, and they were, on the doorstep of Russia. They are no longer, far from us. They are on the doorstep. It's a throw stone from St. Petersburg. Let's not forget that. This is where Putin started to think, okay, what's going on here? You cannot do this. And there were many messages. This happened in 2004. But also there was something alongside happening, mainly the Iraq War. And why I mentioned the Iraq War. United States, we went without the United Nations sanctions to go there. And from Putin perspective, and I would remind, other listeners and other intellectual and like you, at the time, again, certain European countries, including France, they were not happy with United States going it alone in Iraq. The point is now, Putin was not happy. The Chinese were not happy. Certain European governments were not happy. And this is where Putin, as a matter of fact, started to feel, listen, there should be a certain change in the world order. United States has a lot of influence, has a lot of hegemony over the world. So what do you have now? Expansion of NATO and the outlook. And here I'm talking from the standpoint of Putin. Mainly the outlook of Putin, listen, United States is really, dictating and doing, what it behooves United States without regard to the international community. More than that, as a matter of fact, this is when you had the Orange Revolutions in Georgia and in Ukraine, 2003, 2004. From Putin perspective, he felt now, and this is here, really, you have to look at both sides, both sides of the views. From the Ukrainian perspective, they wanted no corruption, they wanted more democracy, they wanted more reform. From Putin perspective, he felt that you had a lot of meddling by United States in the affair of Ukraine, and mainly to change, from pro-Russia to pro-US. So this has changed a lot of things. And then you had something happening in Georgia. In 2008, this is Putin said, listen, you came too far here next to me. I am going to meet Georgian troops. And he supported the separatist, provinces of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Despite the fact that at the time, Secretary of State Rice, Condoleezza Rice, said, listen to the Georgian president, we are going to help you. Well, they did not come to help the Georgian president. The point is, he went, and at the time, Medvedev was president, and he recognized, the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Again, there is something to be said here, mainly from Russian perspective. On what ground they did recognize an independence. Here they will go back to history and will tell, listen, you set the precedent. And they will tell us, and we'll tell, okay, what's the precedent? The precedent is when we, supported the independence of Kosovo. Kosovo was part of Serbia. You had the wars, 1999, this is when NATO hit the Serbs. And later on, Kosovo came and said, listen, I want to be independent. Now, from a Serbian perspective, and from a Russian perspective, the Serb cannot trace their nationalism without Kosovo. This is where they go and they say, listen, where we fought the Ottoman Empire in the Great Battle of 1389, when Prince Lazar led the campaign against the Ottoman. True that the Serbian lost, but for the Serbs and their ally, the Russians, as a matter of fact, you cannot trace Serbian nationalism without Kosovo. So what happened now, Kosovo set a precedent to go ahead for Putin to go and say, listen, as you did in Kosovo, I'm going to do in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And this is what he did recently in the Federal Republic of Luhansk and Donetsk in Ukraine. Please, you want to ask me a question?
Wes, with the brilliant way that you have taken it and put it in a chronological order here, then, it still then, to me, begs the question, how in the name of sweet God and foreign policy can these so-called experts in the United States, in NATO, in the United Nations, all of these experts, How could they have misread Vladimir Putin? Because we are told that we have the best intelligence in the world. We know what he's thinking. But what you're pointing out is everybody misread completely and wasn't ready to get here. That seems to me to be impossible. Aren't we supposed to be ahead of the dictators and know what they're thinking before they actually do it, Professor? Somebody screwed up here, and a lot of people screwed up royally in not being ready for this.
Okay. Well, as a matter of fact, those who did not misread Putin, they weren't out there. They weren't in the media, and they weren't, their views were not put there. Let me remind you, George Kennan was the author of the Soviet containment during the Cold War. We pursued our policy, to contain the Soviet Union based on the theory of George Kennan. George Kennan in the 1990s, he said, listen, what we are doing vis-a-vis Russia is a great mistake, great strategic mistake. So nobody listened. Now, regarding Putin, as a matter of fact, and this is where I think we misread him. I don't misread him. I know what he is. Why? I can see, the journey of his life, but mostly so because you don't have much written about him, really. You have his speeches, and I will tell you about two important speeches that he did. The speech when he annexed Crimea before the Duma in 2014, and the speech that he did in 2015 before the UN General Assembly. Let me put for you in perspective how did I go and form some kind of a mindset about Putin. This is what he said, and listen, he said that Russia was not only robbed, it was plundered. The people of Crimea were treated as a sack of potatoes. And he said, we have our many of our people and our fighter died, and their grave, they are still in the Crimea. And fourth, he said, what happened, throughout, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union until his time in 2015, when he gave his speech, he said, Russia suffered a great historical injustice. Let me repeat that again so your viewer will hear it. A great historical injustice. So me then, of course, I've taken a look and I said, listen, this man at the right time, he's on a mission. He has a conviction. And the point is, I felt that, at the right time, he is going to take certain steps to right the historical injustice that Russia, faced, in the recent modern history.
But then knowing full well that that's what he said, knowing full well that that's what he said and that's out there, and you are correct, that immediately sets the tone for what his mindset is, for what he wants to accomplish. Again, I'm sorry, I have to go back and ask, how did we miss it to the point where he was allowed to basically rebuild his forces, to prepare for everything that's here, to put the military on the border, to be ready with this plan right now? We could not have missed it had anybody simply listened to what you're saying.
Well, as I mentioned to you, some people did not miss it, but the predominant view, they said, listen, before they didn't think he's going to do anything. United States is busy. You have a lot of partisan politics. And this is really, I think, the biggest threat we have in United States, our partisan politics. And then you still have, through that, you have a tense relationship with Russia. We didn't feel, he's going to do that until the time came. And he said, listen, I am going to go and take the Donbass. This is after 2014. Let me put something in perspective, Ed. This is, again, how I took the mindset, because history has a lot of things. Our relationship started to deteriorate with Russia mainly from 2014. Why? Because this is when he annexed Crimea, and we started to put sanctions. And this is where Putin, as a matter of fact, said, listen, I cannot trust the West anymore.
Well, were we not strong enough with those sanctions? Because that's a good point here. If the Russians take Crimea, and we are now in a position where President Joe Biden is putting in, with the help of so many other people as well, economic sanctions that are the most crippling we have ever seen.
Correct.
Let's go back to Crimea then. Sure, there were sanctions here, but there was nothing as crippling like this before. The world didn't gather together. It was as if Crimea was this this blank piece of land. Oh, let them have it. It's just a few people here at this point. Nobody paid the attention there. You let them get away with it. That sets the precedence to move forward.
But that's something. Here, this is where you have to look at Putin and how he looked at the West.
Sure.
Crimea, Ed, it does not, historically did not belong to Ukraine. Crimea belonged to the Ottoman Empire. And in the 1770, you had a war between the Ottoman Empire and Tsarist Russia. In 1774, after a long battle, this is when Tsarist Russia defeated the Ottoman Empire and took Crimea. You have a very important agreement or treaty that was signed, Kushuk-Kainarja, in which the Ottomans ceded Crimea and they gave what we call capitulation agreement to Russia, where Russia became the protector of the Greek Orthodox community in the Ottoman Empire. Mainly, what's I'm talking here? By having Crimea from 1774, Russia was able to project its power in the Black Sea, to be involved in the Middle East and the Caucasus. Now, let's move forward a little bit. When Crimea was with the Soviet Union after the fall of Tsarist Russia. But the Crimea was given to Ukraine when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. You know what I mean? So when Ukraine took its independence, no Russian leader is going to say, well, Crimea belonged to Ukraine. No, Crimea historically belonged to the Russian people, mainly to Russia. So this is really what fueled, Putin. But also, on the other hand, we yes, we didn't read him, we misread him, but also we had a lot of miscommunication. The way we perceive our security and the way Russian, including, of course, Putin, perceive his security. And this came, as a matter of fact, really big gap in miscommunication and led to Ukraine. Because from 2014, let's not forget, let's put everything in context. From 2014, when he annexed Crimea, he supported the Donbas region, where you have pro-Russian people, and then the West, including NATO, started to support the Ukrainian government, arming it, creating a strong 100,000 troops, bringing people to the United States here for training and giving them weapons. I wouldn't say we gave him a lot of sophisticated weapons, no, but we gave him weapons. From Putin's perspective, he felt, listen, after Kosovo, after Iraq, after Libya, I cannot trust them. So what are you doing here in Ukraine? Now, from the Ukrainian perspective, really, this is where it is kind of a little bit controversial and really hard. We need our independence, we need our freedom, we need our democracy. From Putin's perspective, listen, this is my border. This is, you are in my sphere of influence, and I cannot let NATO set up shop, there. From United States, they said, listen, if we are going to go ahead and put pressure on Putin, we have to be there. And this is how created this whole situation.
But let's go to NATO, though.
Miscommunication.
Let's go to NATO, though. Is it possible, then, that if NATO and the Western powers had brought Ukraine into the fold earlier, because that is what is being used as the crux of the issue here for Putin. He doesn't want Ukraine to become part of NATO. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, had someone at NATO and the United States and the powers basically gotten off their chair and brought Ukraine in instead of continuing to just drag their feet on that, is it not possible that we would not have been here either? And that goes through a number of administrations, the Obama administration and certainly the Trump administration, where it was as if we don't care is what they sent. And I think the Ukrainians at that point feel, why don't you want us? We're sitting right here. We're part of this. We want to be a free nation. Did not NATO and those powers just screw the pooch completely by sitting back in their chair and not bringing Ukraine into NATO and into the fold earlier?
Okay, it would have been done in the 1990s, not when Putin came to power.
Okay.
In the 1990s, it was open. It was really open, I would say, from 1996 until 2001, 2002.
But why didn't we do it then?
Well, because we went into Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania. So we expanded there, but we did not include Ukraine, because the talks, you have to be a candidate, you have a whole process, So really, you have a lot of bureaucracy involved. And of course, the Ukrainian at the time, let's not forget, at one time they had the pro-Russian government, You know, they didn't want to.
Yes.
They want to be in. They didn't want to be with NATO and anger Russia. So you had a lot of domestic issues and NATO issues that kind of prevented, you know, this, you know, inclusion of Ukraine into NATO. Now, had you had some leaderships that said, listen, this is the time now, 1990, Russia is weak. You know, you had Boris Yeltsin. He had a lot of problems. Let me go ahead and have Ukraine. I would say that was a possibility then. But after 2001, 2002, that possibility really dwindled, especially with Putin. Putin will never allow Ukraine to be part of NATO. There is something to be said also regarding the mindset of the Russian, and this is where you miss in the news. Look at, you know, Ukraine and Russia and something about the Russian mindset. It was the Russian that freed what is called then, you know, Kiev Rus. Kiev Rus was under the control of the Mongols for 250 years. All this area, what is Kiev today, Ukraine, Belarus, part of Russia, it was under the Mongols, Khanate of the Golden Hordes. It was, you know, the Russians that fought them, and they defeated them, and then the Mongols withdrew. Then you had some kind of a love-hate relationship with the West to catch up with the Europe mainly. And then came two important, from Russian perspective, two important coexistential threat to Russia. From where? Napoleon. Napoleon, early 19th century. Napoleon in September 1812 was in Moscow, and the Muscovite did not want to yield to, you know, to Napoleon. What did they do? They burned Moscow to the ground. Important. Another invasion also, the Nazi invasion. You know, the Nazi invasion, 3.2 million Nazi marched into Russia. Look what happened to Stalingrad, Leningrad. 24 million people died in that war. So from Russian perspective, when we speak about the world order, and yes, United States helped build the world order, the Russian will tell us, listen, we paid the staggering cost for this world order to come about.
So, but what you're talking about then is, at this point, revenge. That Putin is bent on revenge for hundreds of years of atrocities against the Russian people. And I got to tell you, Professor, there's a lot of people who would go, what are you, serious? Hundreds of years that we're dealing with here?
No, Ed, what he's thinking about, he felt that throughout the recent period, and given what happened in the past, NATO did not take Russia's security consideration, Russia's security interest into consideration. And they did not treat Russia as he would have loved to treat Russia. They treated, from his perspective, he felt that NATO treated Russia as a bygone era. Let's not forget, at one time, President Obama said, you know, Russia is a regional power, no more a big power. So from this perspective, and this is why when you read him, when you read the history, when you read the statement, you go ahead and you try to start to, you know, form an opinion, and this opinion is right.
We insulted him? I mean, is it as simple as saying we insulted Vladimir Putin and that's why he's killing Ukrainians now?
From his perspective, but you have to look at what he thinks. He thinks that we did not take into consideration Russia's security interest, and Russia was not treated right. That's what he thinks. And I think myself, you know, because some people say, let's hit the line, you know, the convoy of Russian tanks, let's put no-fly zone. I think that will be a strategic mistake, because true, he faced now stiff resistance he does not expect. And I believe he did a strategic mistake by invading. It was better for him to lay siege and stay in the Donbas region. But the fact is, he will never agree to no-fly zone and to go hit him, which will lead to what? Which will lead a war between NATO and Russia.
Now, okay, let's stop right there. Already there is President Biden who says that Russian aircraft will not be allowed into American airspace. You now have Russian commercial airliners which are not allowed to fly into the airspace of certain countries as well, the NATO countries. You just laid out an ultimatum. No-fly zone, period. Your belief is that if indeed the NATO powers and the Western powers decide that there is a no-fly zone, that America sends in jets, the British send in jets, whomever, that will trigger a world war. Yes. Is that fair?
Absolutely. He's gonna shoot him down, and this is what will trigger, you know, a war between NATO and Russia.
Is there
This is my opinion, and I say it in a very confident way.
Is there any okay? Then let's deal with that because we are sitting on the precipice of that World War III right now. Perhaps closer, well, certainly closer than we've been in my lifetime. I mean, in so many lifetimes as well. How do we avoid this then without more civilians being killed, more 6-year-old children being maimed,
Correct.
and more of the country being bombed into submission?
Correct. Well, Biden, and you heard his speech yesterday, and he has been mainly consistent. He said no. He has been no for no-fly zone, despite the fact that you have senator and congressmen and a lot of activists and analysts out say, listen, we have to put no-fly zone. And
so he's
Zelensky
making the
also,
right decision. The president, when he says no-fly zone, he is at this moment he's making the right call.
I think our intelligence, they are very aware now that Putin, if you put no-fly zone, you are going to put, American lives in harm's way. And if something happens, we have to respond, and it's going to create a new dimension of war. As I mentioned, you want to call it World War III, you call it, but it's going to be catastrophic. So I think that he knows that. He knows that. Now, the problem is, this is what you said, how you are going to go and save the Ukrainian. And this is, yes, we have to really to go ahead with humanitarian effort, increase them. Yes, we need to help them, including with weapons, to fight their way. Although I believe that, the more you give them weapon, the more that Putin is going to go in, is going to destroy more of Ukraine. And I feel that we are in a double bind. Now, the predominant view is to support the Ukrainian. I am for sure that, the invasion of Ukraine really in the 21st century, really, it's very hard to swallow. It's very hard to swallow. But on the other hand, now, what do you have? You have a man on a mission with a conviction and with nuclear warheads. And he already said, listen, I am giving high alert to the nuclear warhead, mainly put it on high alert, which means he is committed. And something about Putin, this is why it's important to know his mindset. And this is what I worry the most myself. If you corner him so much, if you paint him in the corner so much, you tell me, what do you expect he's going to do? Is he going to go soft in the night? Or he's going to be like a bear with huge claws and he's going to jump? He's going to jump at you. He's not going to lay down. He's not going to back off. And I don't care if we put sanctions from here to eternity. At this time now, Putin is not the type known to back off.
What do we? Okay, and you're certainly more attuned to it than I am, and many others are. A lot of these nickel and dime texters and social media people here. The question then needs to be raised: if he will shoot down planes if there is a no-fly zone, if we continue to arm the Ukrainians and we continue to support them however we can, if we continue the harsh economic sanctions, it is your opinion that this will do absolutely nothing to deter him, that he will continue to move forward. What then are we supposed to do to save lives?
Well, this is where you have to compromise. This is why you have to have some outside to compromise. And at one time, because really we affected Russia. Let's not forget that. And you had a lot of Russians, even around Putin, they are not happy with that. Listen, if you are rich and you are close to Putin, probably your sons now, they cannot go anywhere. Your money is going to be probably, looked into it. So you have a lot of people now in Russia, they are not happy with what's going on. So I believe that this is the scenario that I think, most likely. Putin, he will lay siege to Kiev. He will hit it hard until it falls. But after taking Kiev, I don't think he's going to go anymore. I think he will take, already he took East Ukraine. He'll take the north, which is here next to it, and he will take Kiev and he will stop. He will stop there. Now, this is where we, as a matter of fact...
But he will stop and he will still occupy the country.
He will occupy, as a matter of fact, 1/3 of the country, if not more, 1/3 of the country. But he's not going to go, south. He's not going to occupy all the country because he's already facing stiff resistance. And he doesn't want it to have a quagmire like Russia had where in Afghanistan. Now, in Afghanistan, it's really the lesson of Afghanistan. It's fresh in their mind. So this is why I feel that he's going to put all what he got in the battle, to have it quick, and to put Zelensky and the government into a corner and tell them, listen, you have no option, and this is where United States, he'll invite mainly the Europeans and China in. China, as a matter of fact, now is triangulating itself to go into the negotiation. As I say, listen, we are going to make Ukraine neutral. And they're gonna say, okay, Zelensky, you have certain time, and then after you are going to resign. This is how I feel it's gonna work out.
Is that
But
is that the only way that things will work out here? Because what you're pointing then to is a collapse of the Ukrainian government, an abdication, if you will, a firing, if you will, of the government. You believe you believe that is the only way to stop the killing in Ukraine is for the government to fall.
Ed, I was born in Lebanon and I served in the Red Cross for 10 years before I came to the States here. And I know, somehow with the war, I was close to the Iraqi war. So, I lived in a war environment, For Putin, he's not gonna stop. Now, what will force him to stop is that stiff resistance, and then he will take some of his demand, not all of Ukraine, some of Ukraine. But he's not gonna stop, without having met some of his objectives. And his objective is now today to make Ukraine neutral, and I think to try to remove Zelensky. This is mainly his main objective today, because the more he goes into the war, the more he's gonna use more weapons, and the more he's gonna face stiff resistance. So this is where you start, he will compromise, and NATO, and probably the Ukrainian government will start to say, okay, let's see, somehow work out a compromise so we can stop the carnage. We can stop the catastrophe, the tragedies.
Who is going to run Ukraine at this point, though, Professor?
Way for both of them to compromise.
If indeed Putin then gets his way and his desire, as you've pointed out, if Zelensky is forced to leave the country, then who runs Ukraine? Does it become an orphan nation that is going to have to be under? Because look, Putin is not just going to walk away and say, let the United Nations or the EU run. I don't care. You know that Putin is going to want to run that country and bring it back into his sphere of influence.
Well, he will try to bring half of the country into sphere of influence. The other half is not going to be into sphere of influence.
So we're talking about carving up Ukraine?
Mainly, not carving up, drawing mainly in sphere of influence, yes. I think this is what I think myself, what satisfies Putin. The most important thing for him, he doesn't want Ukraine to be a hub for NATO directly or indirectly.
Right.
And he doesn't want the capital, meaning the Ukrainian capital, to be pro-NATO or pro-US. So this is where you can do certain compromise. Where, listen, Zelensky, he might agree with him. It's a variable. But from my perspective, there is today too much blood between the two. You know what I mean? So it's difficult to agree on Zelensky. But he might remain, especially if United States said, listen, this is our demand. We are going to have this, Zelensky here is a hero, and indeed is a hero. But at the same time, Ukraine is neutral. Ukraine is neutral. And we're going to work out. This is something, probably it could happen. Although I think it's slim.
What you're proposing here, it almost seems as if we are once again into what happened during the original Cold War, where the Western powers are going to have to appease the Russian government in order to keep the world from exploding in a nuclear cataclysm. Are we just looking at that again? Sorry, Ukraine, look, hey, you're nice people and everything, we love you, but we got to give you up because otherwise the planet blows up.
The problem is, we are going to support the Ukrainian, okay? But the problem is, if Putin keeps at them, Ukraine already, we are not supporting them. Ukraine is on its own, Ed. We are not there. We are giving them weapons. There is a big difference between giving weapons and fighting alongside the Ukrainian. So really, the Ukrainian are the frontal state. The Ukrainian are paying the price for this huge war, huge of big powers. You know what I mean? And sphere of influences. So this is where, okay, how we are going to, really to stop this carnage. So mainly this is the point. It's not, I don't think of it as more of an appeasement, because Putin is not going to have his maximalist demands. He's going to have, you are going to have a compromise between Ukraine, NATO, and Russia.
Are we once again, though, at that point that we are here, again, due to a lack of vision by NATO and by Western powers for the last 30 years.
Yes, because from a strategic perspective, we should have expected that. We should have expected that. For anyone who knows the history of Russia, the history of European, Russian relations, the history of the Cold War, we should have expected that. But somehow we let our guard down. Somehow we didn't feel that Russia is gonna be, kind of rehabilitate itself and emerge again as a power under Putin. And again, some would argue, listen, China came in, and this relationship between the two. This is where, you have two things coinciding in the world. The Ukraine sphere of influence, but also how China and Russia and other countries in the world look at the international order. I think that the post-Cold War era myself has ended. You have now a new era. And that new era, I think myself, is going through what I call sphere of influences. Now, the point is what United States and our ally are going to do. We are going to accept it, to tolerate it, or to work around it, or we are going to oppose it. This remains to be seen, Ed. Now, you don't have only, listen, United States and NATO have Russia in Europe, and they have China in Asia. But you have, China already, is telling us, has already told us, South China Sea, we have our 200 miles exclusive economic zone. We have extended that beyond the 200 miles. And already we are coming too close, to collide, with the Chinese. And the Chinese are moving closer and closer to the Taiwanese defense lines. So we are talking about, when we speak about Russia and China, really, their outlook to the international order today is different than our outlook today. They want to go ahead and change, some of it. And they will say, listen, we are here, and you have to respect our sphere of influences. How do we respond is something else.
Is the inevitability here, Professor, that if indeed Putin gets what he wants and is able to create a hollow state in Ukraine, and that NATO and the Western powers cannot push him back, he will not surrender, that the inevitability is North Korea and China will become further emboldened, they will become part of this effort, they will move forward, and they will then think to themselves, the West has shown how weak they are, we can now take advantage and we can make our own moves, and that will take us even a step further to nuclear conflagration.
Ed, already from United States perspective, Russia is not the big threat. China is the big threat. And already China has told us and made it clear to us about their sphere of influence. Now, are they going to go do to Taiwan as Russia did to Ukraine? I don't know. This is a variable. It's a question. And I hope they don't do it now. But from their perspective, the Chinese already, they have their own policy. This is their sphere of influence. South China Sea, part of East China Sea, and Taiwan, they don't expect Taiwan to be, treated or to be given sophisticated weapons, or some country says, listen, Taiwan is not part of China. This is, really already we have, Chinese have their outlook, and we know about China. We know about China. So the point is today, how you are going to respond without, prolonging this catastrophe.
Then let's go there. Really? How do we then respond without prolonging?
You have sooner or later, Ed, and this is what happened, Here there is a question. Okay, you go to World War II. This is what we did to Japan. How we brought about the defeat of Japan? We threw nuclear weapon. We fought the Nazi. We went to Berlin. We destroyed Berlin. Let's not forget that. Now, can you do this with Russia? You ask yourself. Can you do this with Russia?
No.
Can Ukraine do this with Russia?
No.
So really what happened today you have a new variable on the scene. And that variable, this is terrifying variable, is nuclear weapons. And Russia has the largest inventory of nuclear warheads. And let me go further also, because we have to think about the responses to our action, not only our action. You have to study, the scenario, how he's going to respond. There is something, if you read the military strategic doctrine of Russia, which really was issued in 2009. Russia, gives itself the authority, when it is threatened to use nuclear weapons in unconventional warfare. So this is where we have, and this is why, thank you God, the Biden administration said, listen, I'm not gonna go. And NATO, the Secretary General of NATO, he has been to Poland and to other, say, listen, guys, we have to help the Ukrainian, and absolutely we have to help the Ukrainian, but we don't want the war to spill over. Because if it spilled over, that's mean a huge war with catastrophic results.
But it then leads us to believe, and leads me to believe, and others perhaps, that we've lost. Because we didn't have any prescient view on what was happening here. We're going to give Russia what they want. China's going to get what they want. North Korea will get involved and get what they want. And we, as the peaceful powers of the world, simply cannot stop them at this point without the fear that we will blow the place to shreds.
Listen, Russia is not going to have what it wants, because its economy now, it went back. I don't want to say to the dark ages, but it's affected.
No, I think the dark ages is pretty close.
You know what I mean? And he's not gonna, and I mentioned that before, he's not gonna have all his demand. No maximalist demand. That is a compromise. So really, I won't say that, United States or NATO lost. No, Russia has suffered and it will suffer. Now again, the future of Russia, even after you have a compromise, they have a lot of investment with Germany via the Nord Stream. What's going to happen to them? So mainly now what we are going to see, we are going to see a huge shift towards China. And this is where we are going to take a look now. This is where, Ed, now, the next step, what's going to be the outlook, of the international community after a compromise. And this is where we are going to see China and Russia and Iran, more of cooperation, more of a world on its own. This remains to be seen. But
you just brought in a frightening scenario. You really did here, because it would seem to me that Russia is willing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Putin and Russia are willing to push the button, and they are willing to throw off a low-yield nuclear weapon somewhere to get this thing started, or to perhaps move it towards a certain conclusion for them. I don't see the Chinese as being that ready to blow something up, but I see the Iranian government certainly willing to blow something up. I mean, you're talking about an axis here, and I don't want to go back to the old axis of evil idea and start all that, but it certainly brings it up as you start to think in the back of your mind that where do we go from here? If Russia doesn't want to push the button, but they might, the Chinese have it and they might push the button, the Iranians might. Holy sweat, Professor! It looks as if it looks like we are the ones who are boxed at this point, and we are going to pay the price.
No, we are not boxed in. As a matter of fact, they are the one who's gonna be affected the most. Look at the Iranian economy. Look at the Iranian people, how they are suffering. They project their power, and they are using proxy forces, and their people are hungry, and they are being treated badly, and severely. Look at China, what's happening to the Uyghur and others. But again, my point is, Ed, we can no longer look at the post-Cold War era as it was. It has changed. It has changed. From Russia, we see that they have taken a step to right what they considered a historical injustice. And I can see again the same things happening with China saying, listen, as this century of humiliation, it's gonna end, and nobody's gonna dictate our policy, and we are going to have our sphere of influence. How we are going to work around it, it's still a variable. Mainly what I mean a variable, it's still a question mark. It's still a question mark. But
I want to bring this up then because you've mentioned Cold War, and we've talked about this a little bit. I do want to bring into the conversation here a report on CNN recently that discussed the potential building of a new Iron Curtain. And for those of us of a certain age, we will remember, before my time certainly, but those in the 50s and the 60s, people there will remember this concept. Now, I want people who are watching on our YouTube channel and also listening on the podcast, listen and watch intently here, because this is the idea of what the professor is discussing here, and this will put it, I think, in a better perspective.
if you look at the map from this perspective. All the blue are the NATO countries that surround. And so what has happened? This emergency NATO response force has never been activated to protect NATO countries. It was always used to project force elsewhere. Hans Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, today saying it will be deployed. It could be up to 40,000 troops. There are ground troops, there are air and sea assets as well. Not the full force being deployed right now, but Wolf, it's in addition to the troops. We already know the United States and the other NATO allies have sent more troops to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. So why is this so important? You see the NATO ring here. Well, look at where Ukraine is. When we started this week, Russia, yes, has a puppet government in Belarus, but here was the line essentially. So these NATO countries had a buffer, Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin takes Ukraine and that goes away, essentially what you get is 33 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Vladimir Putin gets to extend perhaps a new Iron Curtain right there on NATO's doorstep. Right, General? That is what you're so concerned about.
That's right, John. I am concerned about it, but I'm also concerned about the people in Kyiv. Since Harry Truman provided assistance to Greece fighting a communist insurgency in 1947, the United States has helped countries defend their independence. In Kyiv, we've got 40 million. In Ukraine, we've got 40 million people who have an independent country. I'm looking at Kyiv itself. It's going to be besieged. It's under artillery fire and so forth. You've got over 2 million people in there. And the orders that Putin has given apparently is to besiege it and clear it. And that means unquestionably hundreds, maybe tens of thousands of civilian casualties. And for NATO, that's fine. We've activated the reaction force, but we're not going into Ukraine. We're not going to do anything for those people. So in my lifetime, what I've seen is the United States helps nations defend themselves against external aggression. And we're asking, what can we do? The sanctions are great, but what can we do tonight, tomorrow, the next day to help Ukraine and Ukrainians hold on to their independence and stop the impending slaughter in Kyiv?
Professor, it would seem,
Yes.
if we are on the outside looking in, that in order to maintain a global stability, in order to maintain the lives of people on the planet, in order to stave off nuclear war, we, the Western powers, must let the Russians create the new Iron Curtain, must surrender Ukraine as a sacrificial lamb, and must understand that this is the way the world is going to move forward in order for everybody to survive.
Okay, let me tell you my vision. It could probably be your vision. You know, it's an.
I hope it's not.
Well, I hope. Well, I know. I hope. Well, I hope it's the point, but it's an apt point. You know, it has logic to it. My way I look at it, I won't talk about an Iron Curtain like before, the Warsaw Pact and the NATO. I'll speak about sphere of influence. This is how the world is gonna move. A sphere of influence. Listen, we respect each other. Don't go into my territory. Don't do things in my territories that will affect my policy, and I won't do the same in your territories. This is how I think, you know, it's gonna work out. And I think this is where still the whole region, as a matter of fact, with China and with Russia, it's fluid. We don't know how to respond. We don't know how to not that we don't know how to, you know, what policy should we take? What kind of a new world order we are planning? This is all, as a matter of fact, today is under discussion. This is what I think myself. But on the other hand, I agree with the general. We should support the Ukrainian because the Ukrainian, the more they have a stiff resistance, the more they will reduce the demands of Putin. Mainly, that's Putin at the end of the day will say, okay, let's me compromise more. But to say that Putin is gonna withdraw, is gonna be defeated right there in Ukraine, I say it's difficult for me.
This is a no-win situation.
And this is where I agree, as a matter of fact. The point is here today, how to prevent more death. It's 40 million people there. You have now a good number are becoming refugees. You know, you have a lot of people are fighting. So really, and Putin is gonna he's gonna throw the whole thing at them, especially if he's cornered. You know, he's gonna do that. Now, I think that this is where I would like to see a certain compromise. And really the compromise, what I mentioned, you know, Ukraine or Kiev, it's not that it's gonna be, well, 100% pro-Russia. No, it will be some kind of a neutral.
Are we talking about a coalition government?
Well, as a matter of fact, this is what I think myself. the more stiff resistance they do, the more they are going to have a better way of negotiating with Putin. You know what I mean? So listen, Ed, there's something here. Putin doesn't want to go into quagmire similar to that of Afghanistan. In order to do that, he has to do two things. Either he's gonna raise to the ground Kiev and Ukraine, something I think he might do, but I think he won't, because if he's gonna face stiff resistance and it's gonna take a long time, or he's gonna say, listen, okay, I achieved some of my objectives. The US is gonna promise me it's not gonna be involved in Ukraine, it's not gonna be involved in the politics here. Ukraine has informed me that they are not gonna be part of NATO. Let me compromise with them.
Is it more
So
likely
this is
then
here.
that in order to get to where we're going here, that NATO will then decide we will not bring Ukraine into the fold? The European Union may, and again, that's going to take years. It doesn't happen automatically, no matter what anybody thinks.
I think Ukraine might be in the future with EU, but not with
Not NATO.
No.
NATO will then
No,
have to say no to
No,
Ukraine,
NATO,
regardless of anything that happens, and they will then have
This
to
is
allow the
something-
Russian
it's a red
government
line.
some form of a coalition effect in what's happening in Ukraine, which basically creates that sort of created government, which is not entirely free, but still is under the sphere of influence of Moscow. Yes?
red line for Putin and any leader. They will not accept Ukraine in NATO, period. Neither Ukraine nor Georgia. These two things. They won't accept them.
Let's just
They
say
will
that
accept them
happens.
as a neutral state. As a neutral state, listen, they will be in the shadow of Russia, but not, 100% shadow. Neutrals, they will go and compromise, especially with the stiff resistance. Zelensky, as a matter of fact, he emerged as a strong leader, a lot of passion, really fighting his way around. You have a lot of support for the Ukrainian from the world. Even Switzerland, as a matter of fact, has joined, the allies, as a neutral
Things are really different in the world when you piss Switzerland off, okay? That never happens.
Yeah, it really, and I think that Putin, he never expected that even Switzerland, is gonna go and join, the allies.
So are we looking then are we perhaps looking at a future where, if we get to that point where there is no NATO in Ukraine and the government will have to change, let's just say even that Putin allows Zelensky to stay in power, are we not facing the possibility then that Russian influence, either by cyber crimes or individuals that are placed in the government, that he will then try to undermine the free government of Ukraine to try and then have puppets from Russia and Moscow elected there, that he will create the foment, the insurrection, if you will, between the people there, and he will try to then get a legal sense, if you will, control of the government in some way, shape, or form to split it down the middle from being completely free?
It's a possibility, Ed. These are variable. It's a possibility. I think myself is going to agree on a compromise. He's going to agree also because the Russians, you have a good number of Russians, they are not happy with what's going on. So Putin, again, he has to look, okay, even my position in Russia has become a little bit, not that steady. So he has to take really a sober look. The West, NATO, Ukraine, and Russia itself, and of course, his relationship with China. Let's not forget, he is going to be the junior, and already he is a junior partner in that strategic cooperation. Already they have a strategic cooperation between Russia and China.
But is he able to take that step back, Professor? Is Putin at this time, with his mental capacity, where some people say that it's obvious the man has gone off his cracker at this point, is he even possible that he will be able to back up at this point, or that he will be able to see any form of reason? That doesn't seem possible.
No, listen. Now, a lot of things said about mindset, and
by a lot of amateurs too. A lot of amateur psychologists saying it too.
Let me tell you, this is what I say. I say, listen, he's a leader, and he's an autocratic leader. So probably he has isolated himself. He's listening to sycophants. I can bring an analogy with Saddam Hussein. He really didn't know what's going on outside the world. Although Putin is way smarter than Saddam Hussein, but something with Putin, he is what he has been all along. Did we forget what he did in Syria? Did we forget what he did in Chechnya? In Chechnya, he raised it to the ground, Ed. So when they say, oh, listen, he has state of mind, he might do something, this, he already did this. So really, what justified what he did in Chechnya, that now he doesn't justify it for himself to do in Ukraine. But already he did it in Chechnya. Let me tell you about the Chechnya. Grozny in 2000, 1999, 2000, Ed, he raised it all to the ground. You had the gross violation of human rights. Do you know how many Chechen women were raped? You know, do you know the violence that was committed against the Chechens? So mainly what we see here today, say, oh, okay, is he gonna do this? I think myself, if he's cornered, and this is why I always repeat myself, is if he's cornered with no way out, he's gonna be like a bear. He's gonna do to Kiev what he did to Chechnya. And this is where it's not about his state of mind. He has the same state of mind. Same state of mind. His state of mind is to use any means toward his end.
I fear for the world at this point. Let me
Well,
before we leave, let me
world.
just ask you very briefly.
Please, please.
How scared are you with what's happening?
I am worried. I am very worried, as a matter of fact, because I know my post-Cold War era, the future of the international community for my children and your children and everybody's children has changed, Ed, has changed. And I cannot be naive and say, oh, listen, you know something, I can deal with China the way I want. I can deal with Russia the way I want. No, there is a lot of changes that took place. Let me tell you something, for example, from 2000 to 2019, China was able to surpass United States as the largest trader in the world. They trade more with Europe, with the Asian, and with the Middle East, the Gulf, than with United States. Today, they have a strategic cooperation with Russia. They created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There is a lot of changes in the world, Ed. So, of course, I am worried. I am worried because, you know, they have created for themselves, you know, a big power. And from their perspective, they were humiliated, you know, and they were treated unnicely or unfairly with the West. And today is the time they say, enough is enough. So this is where the question for me.
Is it not fair to say that enough is enough when it comes to the screeching, bellowing, partisan politics of America at this moment, where people have to start understanding the facts of what happens? They need to put it into historical perspective, and they need to instead be more concerned about what we are leaving our children, what we are leaving the 5-year-old grandchild, the 16-year-old child, what we are leaving them behind. Professor, the world has changed, and it does not seem at this point in America that we have people who give a damn about their kids and what will happen in 20 years. It's all about whether or not we can piss on a president, we can piss on a former president, we can screech on partisan broadcast television and cable. We can all feel ourselves to be very important, but nobody is given a damn about the next generation right now, which could blow up in their face, and we are leaving them a pile of excremental bullshit that they may never be able to recover from.
Well, you have very strong statements, Ed, but I brought
yes, I do, my friend, and I'm proud of them.
I agree, and I agree. I said, and I broadly speaking, I agree with them, because really, you know, I am extremely worried, because I see the changes, I see the mindset of Russia and China, and you have entered the big power games. They have grievances, they have their outlook, and we have to know exactly how to deal with that. And then we have also to be, you know, why, and you mentioned it early in your talk, why we didn't expect this, because somehow we are always reactive in our policy. We have to be proactive in our policy. And let me add this, you know, and I don't want your listeners now to say, oh my God, what's happening? But also, can we look at Ukraine in isolation, what's going to happen next? Mainly climate change, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, terrorism. But also they are all part, you know, they are all components, you know, of the relationships that we have between Russia, China, and the West. Really, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Do you think that Putin, if he's going to paint it in the corner, he's going to tell Iran, listen, I'm going to give you more weapons, sophisticated weapons, Really, is he gonna not launch, him and China, a lot of more cyber warfare? You know, and climate change. Do you think that now that we're gonna sit down with them, if war happen, or if we have into a clash, direct clash, they're gonna say, oh, listen, while we are fighting, we are going to talk about climate change? This is why you have so many issues involved, and I hope myself, for the sake of the Ukrainian, I don't want them to become refugees. I lived in war for more than 1 year, and I know how war is disastrous. Really, it affects all your life. I really would like to see some kind of a compromise where the Ukrainian preserve, you know, their sovereignty, and the Russians, they will say, okay, you know something, we are not gonna have NATO on our border.
I like to call it selfish, radicalized ignorance is what America seems to stand on at this point. And you
Well,
brought
at
up
least a good part of it. Some part of it.
a good, unfortunately, even the smallest part helps to then grow and fester and create the issues that we have. You brought up terrorism and climate. We're going to have to leave that for another day and come back and do that, because you and I have had some amazing conversations over the years about terrorism, especially in the Middle East, and the growth of that. And again, it's a part of people being able to understand what is the history behind all this. And I want to remind everybody, history is important, and that's what Professor Rabil has been involved in. These are just 3 of the books that I heartily recommend. Please read, educate yourselves on what's happening. Syria, the United States, and the War on Terror in the Middle East, the Syrian refugee crisis in Lebanon, Salafism in Lebanon. Read those books, and you will then get a knowledge of understanding what's happened, and you won't have to worry about listening to partisan hacks on biased news networks and have them throw their absolute bovine excrement into the wind. You will then have some facts behind you. By the way, did I understand at the beginning briefly you have a new book coming out?
Well, in a year, you know, I'm now putting the last touches on it. It's about, you know, the Ottoman policy and the Turkish policy. So I'm looking at the Ottoman policy, and then after that, the Turkish policy.
And again, people, history, 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 history. I tell you all that. Reminder once again that for Professor Rabil, it is easy to get a hold of him, because you can go to his website, Robert Rabil, that's RABIL.com. Or if you'd like to as well, you can join him on Facebook at Robert Rabil, at Twitter at Robert G. Rabil, and you can also find much more of his work as well at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, which is where he teaches and where he lectures as well. Professor, it's always a pleasure, my friend. We are going to do this again. And it's, people, I've only got to tell you, when the professor and I have had coffee together sometimes, I learn more in 10 minutes than I learn in 10 hours of listening to all the...
I learn a lot also from you. It's a two-way street, my friend.
Good. Well, we'll continue to do that. My best to your family again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. You too, Ed.
Thank you very much, Professor. I want to thank Professor Rabil. I want to thank you as well. I want to thank everybody who listens. Don't forget, go to welcometothearena.com to see all of our shows and excerpts, and also for podcasts. Go to wherever you get your favorite audio podcast. You can see it there. iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, Odyssey, Pandora. You will find us all there to where you can listen to these conversations again. Please share and be safe and support the people of Ukraine and those who need the help. For Professor Rabil, for myself and everybody here, I'm Ed Berliner. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. And until next time, rock on, true believers. See you.
This instrument can teach. It can illuminate, and yes, it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it towards those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. Good night, and good luck.